Welcome, everyone. Thanks for making the time to be here today. And happy Groundhog's Day. It looks like we're going to have 6 more weeks of winter, which, if we're living in Edmonton and surrounding area, is a very, very good thing. My name is Brad Ambury. I'm an educational developer with the Center for Teaching and Learning. And we are here today to talk about teaching them how to fish. And we'll talk about how to encourage learner self-regulation through the introduction of metacognitive prompts in your courses, in your activities, and in your assessments. But before we get to that, let's begin with a what if. Imagine 2 students present themselves to you after an exam. Student 1, let's call them Calvina. Calvina reaches out to you through email. They want to share a concern. They wanted to be in the exam. They studied very hard, and they want to let you know that. But when you ask them how they prepared, Calvina says, well, what they did was they reread all of the assigned readings. They made flashcards of the key terms found in the glossary, and they did all of that the weekend before the exam. They felt prepared, but now they're not so sure. The second student is a bit of a different case. We'll call them Hobbes. Hobbes comes to you not because of the exam, but because they want to talk to you about an upcoming assignment. You ask them casually how they thought the exam went, and they tell you that they think it went pretty well. They were familiar with the problems. They were familiar with the concepts. And so you do due diligence. You ask, how did they prepare? And so Hobbes begins to tell you that what they did was they studied their notes, and the notes were based on weekly lectures and PowerPoints. They made summaries for themselves, and they did the same thing with the readings, the assigned readings. They made summaries, and they also compiled question lists, key questions and takeaways that they had. And they compiled these over the course of the term leading up to the assessment. They also went so far as to develop self-tests. They used an online tool called Quizlet, and they made review quizzes, review tests, not only for themselves, but also for their fellow students. And Hobbes also mentions that they really enjoyed the discussion forums. They often went there to find answers to questions they had. And so for us today, what we want to key on is what is so different about these 2 students? What makes them different in terms of their approaches to learning? There's no doubt many things. Their educational histories, their linguistic and cultural backgrounds. And, there's surely so much more that might explain the difference. But for us, it's enough to know that the difference exists. And if we compare the 2, it may be obvious to many of you that it's likely Hobbes is to be our model for today. Hobbes serves as our model. Why? Because they demonstrate not only self-awareness of their learning, but they also seem to be able to self-regulate their learning, meaning they are able to plan for, they are able to monitor, and they are able to evaluate and adjust where necessary their learning and related practices. So today, basically what we're going to try and do is address how it is instructors might encourage students to move toward the Hobbesian end of our self-regulation scale here. And in the webinar, what we'll be doing is we'll be discussing 4 things primarily. What is metacognition and what's its relationship to student learning? Why and how can we encourage metacognition? And then finally, how do we integrate metacognition into the classroom, into our courses, and into our assessments? I'm going to put this very simply because of constraints related to time, but metacognition basically boils down to reflection and the ability of the student to ask themselves questions, a series of self-questions, if you will, related to learning. When I learn, what kinds of thinking do I need to do? when I learn, what kind of things do I need to do? And when I learn, what things will impact my learning positively? And so for us, we are talking about trying to identify some steps that we can take, some steps that we can implement when we want to encourage students, when we want to enable students to increase their self-awareness with respect to learning. For instructors, there is a parallel. In many ways, the student's learning cycle mirrors the teaching cycle, the teaching process. As an instructor might, they'll plan their lesson, they'll monitor the progress of their lesson, and then at the end of the learning event, at the end of a lesson or at the end of a course, the instructor will, of course, evaluate, will reflect on how did the class go? How did the event go? Was it successful? Why or why not? Well, essentially what we want students to do is something very, very similar. We want them to be able to course correct as might an instructor who is revising a course based on, whether something went well or not. And so we want to prompt students to engage with their learning and to begin to plan, to begin to monitor, and to begin to evaluate their learning and their learning progress. Now, before I go further, I think it's important to note that many of the things I'm talking about today, I think you can implement these things in face-to-face classes, in online classes, in blended or hybrid courses, in synchronous and asynchronous learning environments. So it may require a little bit more work to do it in an asynchronous environment, but I think with careful thought and planning, I think it is definitely possible to implement these kinds of strategies and embed them in your courses. So metacognition, to help build metacognition in our students, I think it's important to consider prompts. Now, prompts can be targeted and they can work to explicitly build specific kinds of ways of reflecting on practice for students in our courses and in our learning activities. The prompts should be geared towards assisting students to develop the abilities that are tied to self-regulation. And when inserted into assignments, into activity instructions, these prompts can guide and shape how the student approaches and questions their learning. So self-questioning, reflective work is vital. And if there's opportunity, I think letting students discuss the thought processes, their learning processes with other learners is also important. And of course, these are just but a few of the ways that we can encourage learners to develop metacognitive processes. But to be sure, I think it's important to explain the benefits to students or talking about how to learn, learning how to learn. It's important for students to be able to recognize knowledge gaps, holes in their knowledge, so that they can better target these areas that they need to work on. Allocating time in your classes and your courses for metacognitive activities on a regular or routine basis is ideal, but where that is not possible due to time constraints, I think if you're going to look to incorporate metacognition, I would probably embed metacognitive elements early on in the course, early in the term. And so this way you encourage from the get-go students to begin to think about what it is they're going to be doing and what kind of expectations there are for them with respect to their learning practices. And so the first example I bring up is the course syllabus. We're all familiar with the course syllabus. This is something that we have an expectation to do at the beginning of every course. We walk through our syllabus, we walk and we talk about it with our students. More often than not, it's not a conversation necessarily, it's more a presentation. But at the same time, it is something that we do. And so I think that what can be done is you can use the course syllabus and its various components to foreground certain elements of the learning experience that is to come for students. One thing you could focus on are learning outcomes, course learning outcomes. We're all familiar with these. They describe the knowledge, the skills that students should attain by the end of a course. This is an opportunity, and an opportunity to engage the student, to draw them into a conversation, to get them to begin to think about what it is to do the things that you're asking them to do based on the course learning outcomes that have been identified. They all begin with verbs, whether that's to analyze, to differentiate, to apply. And so why don't you begin by asking students what they think it means to analyze, what they think it means to differentiate, what they think it means to apply. And again, in the specific context that's laid out in the outcome itself. This is a great chance to draw your students in. And so I think that giving them a window into what it is or how it is your specific subject area, your specific discipline might think about these verbs. What is it to apply? What is it to differentiate for a chemist, for a historian? Getting students to begin to think about that is a very important thing to do. And so that opens up for them a doorway, if you will, that kind of points in the direction of these are the types of learning experiences that are awaiting you. Are you prepared? Are you ready? And so I think that beginning with the course syllabus, the learning outcomes is one way to go. You could also use the course syllabus to talk about, of course, another component or another category or section of the syllabus, the evaluation activities, the assessments. Because, of course, the learning outcomes and the assessments are tied. So this is your chance to frame for the students so that they can better understand the conditions and goals of their assessments related to the outcomes that have been identified and discussed already. All of this, I think, could possibly increase student engagement with the course and the course material, and perhaps encourage students to become more intentional about their learning with respect to the particular course and the needs of the course. Another example I'm going to give you is, and this is something that I'm sure that most, if not all, do. The question is, do we do it explicitly? Take every opportunity you have to foreground, to make explicit disciplinary thinking and problem solving. Model this for your students. Think aloud if you can. So I've got a couple of examples here on the screen, but I think of a professor who may be showing a brief video in class. And while they're doing this, they might ask the students to watch the video, and then afterwards there'll be a series of questions they might ask. But one way to approach this metacognitively is to perhaps show a brief video in class, but for the professor or the instructor to think aloud for the students, to talk to them about what it is that they're thinking, about what it is they're seeing as they watch this video. How do they make sense of what they're seeing? Can they highlight the connections, the kind of connections they make for students? And if there are difficult concepts or theories that relate to what's being shared in the video, perhaps the instructor can also share about the kind of questions they might ask or how it is that they might begin to approach these difficult concepts and or theories. This kind of modeling is great practice because it opens the door for the student into the world of disciplinary practice, but because it also mirrors student learning, it encourages the student to possibly explore for themselves what it is to reflect on their learning practice.